just like a Scottish American is proud of being from Scotland, I'm proud for being African. Now, in our school books, they tried to tell me that all Africans were savages.
This is exactly what he used to think Sub-Saharan African history consisted of. Just thousands and thousands of years of people roaming around Africa, hunting animals, eating their carcasses, hunting humans, eating their carcasses, playing a bunch of drums while people dance around a fire to summon the spirits of the dead ancestors or something like that. Yeah, a bunch of like voodoo type crap and half-naked people with spears who would kill each other and live like barbarians. That's all I thought Sub-Saharan African history was before the Europeans arrived. Now, some of you may be thinking that I'm kind of an idiot because I'm making a history video, which means I'm into history, right? So what did I think before the Europeans arrived? Africans were just a bunch of cannibals and crap. Well, the thing is you'd be correct. That's exactly what I thought. The thing is, like, African history isn't completely hidden in America, right? I mean, we have a bunch of books about ancient Africa, tons of YouTube videos about the African civilizations, many articles about Africa, right? So how did someone like me, who's in history, not grasp any of this information? Basically, I didn't care about world history back then. Sitting in history class, I would just do the assignments, then leave. That would be it. The only way I would learn history is through school, and I didn't even care about school. I would just, Google search my way through all these assignments in history class, which means the only thing I'd learn in school, to be honest, is just Western civilization. Like, sure, we talk about China and Japan and briefly other countries in Asia, but not as much as we talk about Europe and America. I, especially in history class, never heard anything about Sub-Saharan Africa except just slavery, more slavery, and the European powers dominating Africa, and like that's it. That's all I've learned about Sub-Saharan Africa from school. Now, look, I'm an American, right? So I don't know what classes are like in Europe and Asia. If you are from Europe and Asia, though, please shout out what your history classes are like in the comments, because I actually want to know. That kind of interests me. Some of you might be confused because in your ancient civilization class, Africa is actually talked about a lot. But what region of Africa are they specifically talking about? Mostly just North Africa and specifically Egypt, because everyone knows about the pyramids and all that crap they're found, like, King Tut and all that stuff. Everyone knows about that. Also, Egypt is discussed multiple times in the Bible, and the Bible is basically ingrained in American culture, so Americans know a lot about the Egyptians, which means almost every single time Africa is discussed in schools, it's mostly going to be about North Africa. In today's world, though, doesn't it seem like we should be talking about more about these rich Sub-Saharan African empires, though?
I hope we can keep expanding our teachings on Black history.
After all, Black Lives Matter is on the rise. Black History Month is applied at almost every single American school nowadays. Is Black History Month finally tearing down the stereotypes about Africa? The stereotype of Sub-Saharan Africa being inhabited by a bunch of like tribal barbarians and cannibals? Well, from what I've seen at my American school, just not really. You know what they do talk about, though, when talking about Africa? Slavery. What else? Oh, yeah, they also talk about European colonialism. And yeah, that's it. Now, the point of bringing this up in Black American organizations is, I think, talking about how evil the European colonialism was and how evil the Atlantic slave trade was, which, I totally get. That's completely understandable, right? But only bringing those topics, in my opinion, just make it seem like Black people were just defenseless, can never defend themselves throughout history. All they were just unsophisticated barbarians living in a jungle, half naked with wooden spears, when all of a sudden, just like a few, white people arrived and then dominated them in 2 seconds because Africa just simply didn't have the technology, which is actually not true. The Europeans had to wait centuries before they can invade Africa. Around the Columbus era, Europeans wouldn't even dare to take a step in the interior of Africa because of how well off the African kingdoms were in their military. It wasn't until the European Industrial Revolution came to be when Europe was, basically just able to kick the whole world's ass. Way back in the day, though, rich Sub-Saharan African empires existed throughout most of the Sub-Saharan African regions. They're just not really talked about, at least in America, it seems like. The only time in Black History Month they talked about Africa is when I was walking in school towards the social commons. I saw this huge poster of Africa on the wall displaying how big Africa was. It was a map that kind of looked like this, Australia was able to fit in it, China were able to fit in it, India were able to fit in it, all these other countries were able to fit in Africa. Like, who cares? They're saying Africa's cool just because of how big the continent is. You can fit Africa in Asia. Asia's a lot bigger than Africa. They're really going to say Africa's great just of how big the continent is? Like, look, imagine if the UK had American History Month and all it was talking about was how big the North American continent is. Don't you think that would offend Americans out of all the things you could talk about as just how big the North American continent is? And Black History Month, there should have been a map pointing out all of the rich Sub-Saharan African kingdoms that existed. And, if we're talking about Black history, at my school during Black History Month, they didn't even talk about one of the richest people in the world who was a black man, Mansa Musa. I guess I just don't understand. Now, look, like I said before, in America, there's hundreds of articles about Sub-Saharan Africa, hundreds of YouTube videos, all that stuff. I mean, how else was I able to make this video? I read all the books about the African kingdoms, right? You have to keep in mind, though, that there are some people that just do not give a crap about history. They don't watch any history videos. They don't care to read history books or read articles, which, it's fine. I'm not hating on people that aren't into history, but I'm just saying. So the only history they're going to get is in their world history class, which only seems to talk about the West. Some of you out here might be thinking, well, wait, isn't there a reason that, these African kingdoms don't have any records or any history? Yeah, no, it's the lack of written records, right? Most African kingdoms back in the day didn't write their history down, so yeah, it's just it's all forgotten. The thing is, a lot of rich African kingdoms preserve their history, just not how you would expect. The way Europeans would preserve their history is attaining written records and documents. They would simply just write everything down. When the Europeans took over almost all of Africa, when they found that these African kingdoms didn't have any written records, they just thought, these people just don't have any history. Wow, it sucks to be them. The way Africans would preserve their history, unlike the Europeans, is singing songs about their history, telling stories, and those many songs and stories were passed down through generation after generation. That's how most Africans preserve their history. During colonialism, Europe just thought Africa had no history and that was it. And that's exactly how the stereotype of Africa got passed around, that Africa just has no history. When European colonialism was ending in Africa and a lot of countries were declaring their independence, those songs and stories of their history was pretty much heard of even after colonialism. Some leaders in Africa demanded to take those songs and stories and write them down to finally preserve their history in a document. That's how nowadays people actually have a lot better understanding of Sub-Saharan African history. Even when in those countries in Africa, their history has gaps, there's historic records from the Middle East and Europe when Africa used to play a big part in international trade. Now, there's so much information about Africa. I'm going to, the best of my ability, describe these African kingdoms that dominated Sub-Saharan Africa before the Industrial Revolution arrived, because the Industrial Revolution is when things got super, super messy for Africa. But a little bit before the Industrial Revolution, Sub-Saharan Africa, there was a time where it was thriving. This next empire is in West Africa along the Sahel Plain. If you don't know what the Sahel Plain is, it's basically the border between the desert to the north and the jungle to the south. The Ghana kingdom sitting right along the Sahel is actually very important to how Ghana became a long-lasting flourishing empire. It lasted from the 6th century all the way to the 12th century. And the reason for lasting that long is mostly due to the geography in the region. Since the savanna is half desert, half jungle, and still receives rain on a regular basis, it's perfect for growing a lot of crops and also hunting animals, considering there's about 200 plant-eating mammals in the region. Yeah, that's a lot of access to food. The Senegal River and the Niger River flowing through Ghana also gives huge access to water. These three components are pretty much perfect for starting a successful kingdom. Before Ghana was ever a successful kingdom, though, in about 3000 or 1000 BC, Stone Age farmers in the West Sahel started growing sorghum and millet in the Sahel grasslands. Due to the large access to food and water, Ghana began to develop quickly. As the Soninke people, the ethnic group of Ghana, began taking all their natural resources into consideration, they established a few small settled communities. As time went on, Ghana began to grow some more settled communities until they eventually developed a bunch of big villages that were governed by chieftains. In about 500 and 400 BC, the people of Ghana discovered iron. They quickly utilized the iron technique and were actually the first to do so in West Africa. Since the people of Ghana got their hands on iron and started using it for iron weapons, Ghana's military started to look promising, especially when they got their hands on iron before the other neighboring kingdoms did. The people of Ghana during this time also interacted with Saharan nomads to the north and started a trading process. Ghana trading with some of the Saharan tribes paid off when the people of Ghana received horses from North Africa. Now Ghana has advanced iron weapons and horses. Ghana had, a look at their military and they thought it was looking pretty good. So they thought, hey, man, our military's looking good. How about we just expand that territory? They accomplished that by subjugating other kingdoms close by and increasing their territory. By the 10th century, Ghana successfully became an empire. As Ghana just continued to develop more and more, massive rainfall at one point flooded the dry gullies and washed gold into alluvial deposits. That paved the way for Ghana extracting gold a whole lot easier. Everyone would use these gullies during the time, thus making the empire Ghana even richer. There was one problem with this gold extraction, though. It all depended on Ghana's geography. So if there happened to be a drought or something drastically changed, there might be no way to extract gold easily. So it all just depends on the climate. However, during this time, the Sahel's geography was definitely in Ghana's favor. Ghana's massive gold production thrusted the empire into strong commerce. The first people they traded with were the Berbers, which are the Saharan desert nomads, and trading with the Berbers guarantees perfect trade and transportation. The reason for this is because the Berbers roam around North Africa and have connections to the North African coast. Having connections to the North African coast means also connections with the Mediterranean. Ghana trading with the North African powers poured even more riches into Ghana, because that also meant that Ghana was trading with the Mediterranean. Ghana soon became the first great power in the medieval Sahel, in part due to Ghana's early trade with the Saharan Berbers. An Arab geographer, Muhammad ibn Hakwel, who lived in 988, said, "The ruler for Ghana is the wealthiest kingdom on the face of the earth because of his treasures and stocks of gold extracted in machinery times for his predecessors and himself." At this time, Ghana dominated Sub-Saharan Africa, in part due to effective food production, iron weapons, and their transportation of horses from North Africa. Ghana's commerce with the surrounding Saharan nations improved even more until it became an official country to be a part of the trans-Saharan trade. Salt, copper, and dates from the Sahara were all traded within the region. Ghana had access to tons of resources that could be traded. Slaves, livestock, iron tools, weapons and utensils, animal hides, sandals, cushions, clay pottery, baskets, medical herbs, cola nuts, and food like dry fish, spices, honey, and fruit. Ghana ended up being in the perfect position to control the global caravan trade because a little after successful commerce with the Berbers, camels were now introduced in North Africa, making transportation and trade 10 times easier. People during this era called camels the ship of the desert because of how well camels were for arid environments, and their flat feet were perfect for walking through a desert. Centuries and centuries before this, camels were originally found in Arabia, but then got transported to the desert of Africa. Camels didn't necessarily make a huge difference until the trans-Saharan trade was introduced. Then camels became a huge deal with the deserts of Africa and Asia. More trade routes were introduced in Africa because of the camels, and now Ghana trading with Tripoli in Egypt were common. A freed Greek slave who converted to Islam and became a geographer, Yahut al-Hamawi, described Ghana's commercial situation. Merchants gather in Ghana, and from there, one enters the desert waits towards the country of gold. Trade would continue to thrive more and more because that meant more trade routes are opening for Ghana. Ghana began to receive goods they've never seen before. Since Europe is connected to the Silk Road and goods from East Asia get transported to Europe, Ghana brings in goods from Europe through the Mediterranean. Silk, velvet, brocade, jewelry, mirrors, carpets, perfume, paper, tea, coffee, and sugar. Ghana also featured iron weapons such as blades, scissors, needles, and razors, brass, and copperware. What Ghana was looking forward to the most in trade, though, was the transportation of horses from North Africa, because those species of horses were actually not native to Sub-Saharan Africa, which means Ghana had a great advantage in military skirmishes because Ghana could fight on horseback when the other neighboring kingdoms couldn't. Ghana also wanted to get their hands on cowrie shells, which, believe it or not, they actually used as cash in West African markets. When global trade for Ghana began booming, like really booming, Ghana really wanted a training center around the Sahel. It would be a city just dedicated to trading with the other nations. Ghana at first thought about building their own city dedicated for trade, but since Ghana at the time had the most advanced military in Sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana realized that they could just probably find another already existing established trading center owned by a clan or kingdom and just simply steal the trading center from their territory. So just Ghana did exactly that. Ghana searched, and what they found was this trading center called Agadas to the north. Agadas was owned by a bunch of Berbers who called themselves the Sanhaja clan. The majority of the Agadas traders were from North Africa, but specifically from Morocco's Atlas Mountains, which were inhabited by the Zanta clan Berbers at the time. The thing about the Zanta clan is they really started to take control of the trans-Saharan trade, between Agadas to the south and Morocco to the north. However, the true rulers for these markets were the Sanhaja nomads who used to own Agadas. The Sanhajas were kind of smart. They weren't a big fan of setting communities in urban areas in the middle of a desert. They've traveled with just pretty much tents. Even when they were nomads, they also just kind of sat along all the major caravan routes in Africa so they can get in on this trade too. All of the important trade routes that would eventually connect to the urban cities were all secretly controlled by the Sanhajas because they would just kind of sit around the trade routes. The Sanhajas would make money by controlling these trade channels either by serving as some caravan guide and guard or just by being bandits and raiding and pillaging some travelers so they can steal the items. Eventually, the Sanhajas created a town of their own called Agadas, which was just their very one trading center. But Ghana was just kind of, thanking the Sanhajas for this beloved village because Ghana's plan was just to invade and take it over. And, they did. Ghana completely invaded and conquered Agadas, kicking all the Sanhajas out of the village. Once Ghana fully seized Agadas, the Sanhajas were kind of just cut off from their trade and their income was no more. And now the Zanta clan recognizes Ghana's authority, making it super official that now Ghana is in control of Agadas. The Sanhajas will never forget what happened though, and they soon become pretty jealous because shortly after Ghana took over Agadas, the trading center flourishes like it never did before. Global trade exponentially increased once Ghana took over Agadust. An Arab scholar named Abu Bakari, who lived in Islamic Spain, described the commercial center as having a large population with well-built, attractive homes. Muslim traders in North Africa would consistently come down to trade with Ghana. It's right next to a location that allowed gold to be transported to the north and then struck into gold coins in Morocco. An Arab geographer, Ibn Khaldun, described Agadust abundant profits and the constant coming and goings of caravans. The Sanhajahs were rightfully pissed from all this, so they wanted to devise a plan to take back Agadust so they could have the commercial center to themselves. This plan to take back Agadust was called the Almoravid movement. Eventually, the Zanta clan and the Sanhajah were able to work better together because the Zantas actually converted to Islam. During this time, Islam spread like wildfire in the Sahara. That meant that the Sanhajahs and the Zanta clan could work better together. So they began a strong business tie with each other. They had to figure out a way to trade somehow, so a little bit their only option was to trade with the Zanta clan up north. The spread of Islam in West Africa started to get crazy during this time. As decades went by, Sub-Saharan Africa began to take Islam seriously, so much so that certain tribes would even partake in the Mecca pilgrimage, which is something a devout Muslim had to do at least once in their life. Since the Sanhajah clan started to break up into smaller tribes, there's this one tribe, Judullah, whose leader visited Mecca in 1035, since that tribe was Muslim. Yahya ibn Ibrahim really started thinking when he traveled to Mecca. He saw all these determined Muslims practicing their faith and taking it all seriously. They have all the understandings and practices down in Islam, and Yahya felt like the West Sahara didn't have any of that. Their tribe had just the very basic understanding of Islam and wouldn't behave like the Muslims in the holy place. Yahya wanted to change that. During his long journey home from Mecca all the way to the West Sahara, he comes across this man in the city of Kairouan. He was a Muslim theologian. Yahya talks about how he wants real Islam in his tribe and all in real Islam across the West Sahara. The man sent Yahya to southern Morocco in a religious establishment. Not a lot of the people are a big fan of spending months and months in a desert because, it's a desert. One man Yahya met, though, didn't seem to have a problem with that at all, for better or for worse. Yahya met Abdullah ibn Yassin. Yassin was actually perfectly fine with spreading the true Islam across the West Sahara because his mother actually had Sanhajah descent and was a part of the Jazula clan in the town close to Ghana. In 1039, Yahya and Yassin took their voyage to visit the Jadula clan. It turns out that Yassin was kind of a hardcore dude. I mean, he was like really set on converting everyone to Islam, even if that meant force. He led the Jadula clan to attack the Lamtuna clan, and once the Lamtuna clan were conquered, Yassin forced them to convert to Judullah's new religious movement. Judullah, looks like it's doing pretty well right now. They just conquered a tribe. Yassin was a better understanding of Islam and all of the West Sahara. Yeah, well, people in Judullah actually hate Yassin. They're just kind of done with this bullcrap. All that people in Judullah thought about Yassin is just this strict, arrogant know-it-all. They're kind of like, who is this guy to just show up here in Judullah, forcibly break our understanding of Islam to replace it with this new little alien version of Islam to us? Like, no, to hell with this guy. Everyone in Judullah grew to hate Yassin, except for Yahya, though. He was still on this, all for this new religious conversion and movement, which is why Yassin wasn't able to get killed by the Judullah because of Yahya's protection. Eventually, though, Yahya dies, and now the people of Judullah have their chance against Yassin. The people raided Yassin's home, they vandalized his house, robbed him, and burned his house down. However, Yassin was able to escape Judullah and seek shelter elsewhere. At first, he was hiding until he came across the Lamtuna clan, who he once attacked. Even when Yassin attacked Lamtuna, Yassin was kind of like, hey, guys, I know that I killed a lot of your men, attacked your tribe and all that, but I think maybe the Almoravid movement is something a little bit more important, don't you think? We have a bigger enemy on our hands, and if we take back Agadust, that means better trade for you, right? That's what you wanted from the beginning. Ghana wasn't a Muslim nation yet, and Yassin wanted almost all of the Saharan Africa to become Muslim. Since Ghana was the biggest Sahelian superpower in the region, Yassin wanted to invade Ghana and force the civilization to become Muslim. The Lamtuna clan during this time was constantly trying to take back Agadust, but Ghana kept pushing them back. So Lamtuna teaming up with Yassin to take down Ghana is right up Lamtuna's alley. Yassin's supporters were called the Almoravids. As we all know, since Yassin's going to play a huge part in the Lamtuna clan, he's going to be really strict about his version of Islam. The thing is, Umar, the head of the Lamtuna clan, agrees. Umar agreed to the value of praying, fasting, no alcohol, not eating certain foods, traveling to Mecca, and reading the Quran. The Lamtuna clan were even willing to use jihad to have people convert to their version of Islam in the region. All of Lamtuna's agreed values led everyone to feel finally united. Lamtuna even got some other clans in the region to support the Almoravid movement. Those clans actually used to be a part of the Sanhajah clan. Some other clans that used to be Sanhajah remained insurrectionists. One of those was the Jadula clan. Once Yasin made up his great military, Yasin's kind of like, hey, I mean, we have this nice military, right? I mean, I say we just go wipe out the Judalas and everyone who rebelled before we actually start our Almoravid movement. So the Almoravids just basically massacred everyone who rebelled against Yasin's Islam and the Judula clan. After that is when the Almoravids became super powerful in the West Sahara by 1048. Several conflicts were happening as well because the Almoravid Empire was really expanding. The Almoravids were actually going to do it. They were going to take back Agadust. Yasin sent many military campaigns and invasions to Agadust to try to take it over. Ghana was just used to individual clans trying to take back Agadust, but now a bunch of clans at the same time. That led Yasin's military successfully taking back Agadust in 1054, basically the best commercial center in Sub-Saharan Africa. You know, Yasin was feeling pretty good about his military. He was thinking of sending another military campaign to a commercial center, Sujumasa in southern Morocco, where the gold coinage was made. Ghana used to transport their gold to Sujumasa to configure them with the gold coins, but Sujumasa being taken over by the Almoravids cut off trade with Ghana even more. Meanwhile, the Judala down south actually kind of wanted to get a revenge on the Almoravids for that one massacre that took place in their clan, so they sent attacks to the Almoravids. Umar, the head of the Lamtuno clan, was killed, and Yasin was killed as well in 1059. After Yasin's death, Abu Bakr, who was the best military leader in the Almoravid movement, became head of the Almoravids. Back in Ghana, since the Almoravids took back Agadust, strict Islamic laws were forced on the people of Ghana. Most people in Ghana during that time either converted to Islam or were forced to. Ghana's traditional religious practices they've had for thousands of years were now starting to disappear. Now Islam was starting to take over. In 1087, Abu Bakr, the head of the Almoravids, passed away and was replaced with 6 individuals among his sons and nephews. Yeah, I don't know why he couldn't just pick one. He picked 6. I don't know what he was thinking. He's kind of an idiot for that. The 6 sons and nephews really started getting in each other's backs. They simply wanted power and couldn't really agree to anything in the policies of how to run the Almoravids. Those arguments began to screw a lot of stuff up. Since the people in power were always arguing, that meant less control of the people of Ghana. Eventually, the people of Ghana discovered the Almoravids' weak spot. And while the people in power were just bickering the entire time, Ghana found their chance, began an insurrection, and actually successfully took back Agadus from the Almoravids in 1100. The Arab geographer Al-Sharif wrote in 1154, Ghana, the greatest of all towns of Sudan in respect of the area, the most populous, and with the most extensive trade. So Ghana's city Agadus was still kind of flourishing in the 12th century. However, during the 12th century, there was kind of a population problem because of the climate. The geography in Ghana started to change. Crops weren't being grown like they used to, and gold production is screwed up because the gullies are tried this time. That led a lot of Ghana citizens to travel elsewhere, places that had a better climate and geography. They also wanted to leave because, Ghana's in too many wars, and there was decades and decades of war with the Sanhaja tribes, and they just kind of had enough of all the wars. Due to all these issues in Ghana, the trans-Saharan trade didn't deem Ghana relevant anymore, and the trans-Saharan trade routes were going around other kingdoms close by, such as the Walata and other kingdoms along lakes and rivers where water is more accessible. So Ghana just kind of disappeared. That's how it ended. It just disappeared. But the empire lasted from the 6th century all the way to the 12th century, which is actually one of the longest lasting empires of all time. But eventually, empires do come to an end. Unfortunately.